So let me introduce Dr. Sarah Mowry, who is an associate professor at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And she's going to give us a talk today on negotiation skills. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your talk.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for having me. We're going to try a little experiment during this talk. So we're going to see if we can make some breakout rooms and get you guys to do some negotiation. Okay. So let me share my screen. Listen, I am thrilled to be here, and Sarah Hodge asked me to come and talk a little bit about negotiations and just things that I've picked up along the way after she and I chatted, over a year ago now, I guess. I do have some disclosures, none of which are, hi Sarah, relevant to this discussion really, except that I'm really not a negotiation expert. I do think that is relevant, but I think that there are some things that that we can think about as we're talking about how do we make when we're talking about jobs or really any kind of negotiation, how do you get the best deal maybe for yourself, but also thinking about it in the broader context of your group or department that you're talking about. We're going to talk a little bit about some definitions. I have some information around resources that you can use when you're negotiating salary. I'm going to have you guys do a little bit of practice and then maybe think about your priorities for your next negotiation. You do need something to write with and 2 pieces of paper. So if you have those handy, fantastic. See if you can grab a couple pieces of paper. I think it'll be helpful if you take some notes when I have you do your practice stuff here in just a second. So, I think one of the things is to recognize is that negotiation can be hard, and especially if you don't do a lot of it, it can be uncomfortable for many people. And I think this is particularly true as you're coming out of training when we have never really had to negotiate for, most of us have never had to really negotiate for the conditions or terms of a employment before. Once you're finishing training, we're always just sort of told where we go, right? You match into residency, you match into fellowship, and there's not a lot of negotiation that happens there at all, really. And so now you're leaving training having never had to do this, and that's a hard thing to do. So I think it's easy, in the worst case scenario, you are potentially talking to somebody who's negotiating with you, not necessarily in good faith. But I think that it's also, maybe that's not, I would hope that that's not the case for most of the times that you're negotiating, but it's easy to not get the resources that you need to be successful if you don't know how to ask for them. I think there's something positive here in that when you negotiate successfully with another party, that everybody gets something out of the exchange, right? And sometimes that means that both sides compromise to a certain extent. But the goal, of course, is to get the best deal that you can for yourself within the confines of what the other party can offer. So what I'll tell you as you are thinking about negotiating your next thing is to ask, right? So if you don't ask, no one's going to give it to you. And the worst that they could say is no. Although I suppose really like the worst thing that they could do would be to fire you or not hire you. But I think that maybe if that's the case, then things weren't going well to begin with, right? But I think that really the worst that they could say is no, that we can't do that. But a lot of the times they'll say, okay, well let me get back that's interesting. Let me get back to you on that. Let me see what I can do about that. So you've at least opened the door to have a conversation around that issue, whatever it is, whether it's, you know, family leave or moving expenses or salary, you know. So I think there's a couple of things that, a few definitions that we'll go through, and then a couple of assumptions, right? So when you look at the negotiation literature, there's something that they talk about called BATNA, which is the best alternative to the negotiated agreement. And really, I think the way to think about this is, what is the lowest or least amount of something that you in this negotiation are willing to accept? So for instance, if you are a seller, let's say you're selling something, what's the lowest price that you would be willing to accept for the item that you're selling? And then there's, as I mentioned, if you don't ask for it, nobody's gonna help you with it. And so the goal is to get into some area where you can have overlap in what the parties have in terms of their expectations. And that's what we call the ZOPA, or the zone of possible agreement. So this is the place where negotiation happens, or where give and take happens, and there's overlap in the expectations around the agreement. It's a place where you can find common ground. I think we have to assume, that people are negotiating in good faith, especially if we're talking about employment opportunities. There's two other, if you're just in negotiation in general, thinking about this other concept of distributive negotiation versus integrative negotiation. So if you're going into something and you feel like the amount of something that you are negotiating for is fixed, and maybe this is, you could think of in our world, maybe block time in the operating room is a fixed amount, right? So you can negotiate how much block time you get out of the pie, for instance, that the group owns in terms of their block time. So you have to, that's not necessarily something that you can change the size of. But then a lot of the times we're thinking, if you're coming in as an additional faculty member, how do you increase the size of the pie so that everybody gets more of the pie? And that's, you're coming in, you're going to add revenue, you're going to bring in new patients and expand the footprint of your department, then you are increasing the size of the pie, and that potentially gives you more wiggle room for negotiation. Questions about either of those two concepts, or any of those concepts, whether you're talking about the size of the pie, or those definitions around what's your lowest amount that you're willing to take? Any questions? Okay. All right, so we're gonna practice. So let's see if we can make this work. So we're gonna send like half of you out to a breakout room, and I'm gonna send you some information about this particular object which you are trying to buy. And the other half of you are gonna stay in the room for just a minute, and I'll give you your instructions. So I think.
Hi, sorry, I'm here trying to
Hi.
Put it all together. So I've got the breakout room.
Great.
So you want 2 people per breakout room, or you want?
Yeah, if we can do that.
Yes, okay.
And then did you get the message that I sent you with their instructions?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So yeah, you're gonna pretend that you're like at a flea market, right? And there is this chair, and some of you are gonna be sellers and some of you are gonna be buyers. And the goal is to get the best deal that you can for yourself in your negotiation. So we'll give Javia here just a second.
Sorry, just give me 1 second.
No, you're fine. I know this is a little bit complex and slightly outside of the norm for like usual Grand Round Zoom. I get it. And if we don't have an even number of people,
Do
I can,
not.
that's fine. So why don't you,
Can I add
put-
3 people to one room?
yeah, I think that'd be fine.
Okay. All right, the rooms are created. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and open all the rooms, and you should get a notification about the room that you're in. And you'll be able to join.
Okay, so half of them are gonna go out right now, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so about 5 of you should get a notification right now. Okay.
Okay, so those of you who are left in this room, you guys are the sellers of this chair, and you are willing to accept the lowest number that you're willing to sell this chair for is $500, which, by the way, for this chair would be a really good deal. And from a transport standpoint, you can transport the chair, but you're going to charge them extra to do it. Okay. So you can have a negotiation with the person in your breakout room, sort of depending on how you want to do it. But the idea is to get the best deal you can for yourself with your partner in the breakout room. So now, Jay, you can send those, now these leftover, the 5 that are in this room, you can then distribute them to the breakout rooms.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what I'm gonna do, I'm actually gonna have to close all the rooms and then reassign everybody.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you
it
send
won't-
them? Oh, really? It won't let you send them out?
Yeah, it won't let me assign new rooms or
Okay.
create new rooms that I'll have to do.
Did the other ones get their information?
Yeah, I let them know.
Yeah, but did you tell them like the message about what they
Oh,
can?
actually, give me 1 second. Let me send that to them. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So they've got the message.
Okay. And I'm going to give everybody about, let's say, 5 minutes. Okay. Oh, interesting. Can everybody see that message?
What happened?
I think so.
Oh, nuts.
What happened?
I didn't see anything. I don't
You didn't
think.
see anything?
No.
I saw
Great.
something that said I'm the buyer.
Shh.
Oh,
do that.
sorry. The message should only have gone to people that were in breakout rooms.
I think that works because
Okay.
I didn't get it, and I'm
It
the
was,
seller.
right, it was right at the top. It was a little, all I looked up there and said something about being a buyer.
Okay.
Okay.
Keep
I-
the information.
It wasn't on there long enough.
Don't say anything, Dr. Brackman.
It's Dr. House.
Oh, Dr. House, I'm sorry. I can't see who's talking. All right, so don't say anything. I'm gonna give you guys, Jay's gonna send you back out into the rooms here in just a second. And you're gonna have 5 minutes to negotiate this chair. So, thank you. So that, I think, congratulations, Jay, you survived my breakout rooms. Thank you very much for doing that. I know that it was challenging. So was anybody able to come to a successful negotiation conclusion Was anybody able to buy the chair or sell the chair? Oh,
Yeah,
you're muted.
John and I negotiated, and we got down to a price, but I have to pay the shipping. So that's how it got down to the shipping charge was the sticking point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started at 1,000 and he worked me down and I said, what, 800? No, he's got a bad back and he didn't think that chair's worth it. And I said, no, that sells for $1,500. We went back and forth and I finally agreed to sell it to him for 500 but he has to pay all the shipping.
Yeah. Good. Was anybody unable to come to a successful negotiation?
Dr. Shaw and I couldn't.
No.
We were too disparate.
Interesting. What was the sticking point?
That was just the price.
Fair enough. Yeah. So I think, you know, the idea is that there's give and take, right? Like, and sometimes there's, you know, if the number is really outside of what you are comfortable with, then maybe this is not a negotiation that's going to be successful. But there are other things that you can negotiate sometimes too, if the price is not as maybe as good as you want it to be. Like the other option in this scenario was the shipping, right? Or the pickup. I can pick it up, but I can't pick it up till tomorrow, or I can deliver it to you today, but I'm going to charge you more. So there's ways that you can negotiate around something if let's say, for instance, if we're talking about salary, that thing is relatively rigid and or fixed, which you may find if you're looking at academic jobs, that may be something that is not as negotiable to a certain degree as some of the other benefits that a program may be offering you. Okay, so let's go back to slides. And oops. Okay. You can't see that though. Oi. Okay. Okay. So that was the chair. And I mean, it's a silly little thing, but I think the idea is really to get you thinking about asking, right? Like the worst that the seller could say if you were the buyer and you said, no, I'm going to pay you $250. The worst the seller can say is like, no, right? Like you're not going to get it for that price. But can you come to a place that is mutually acceptable to both parties? So when we're talking about contract negotiation and salary negotiation, as you're thinking about moving out into practice, I think it's important to know your worth, right? And so there's a lot of places where you can go and get this kind of information. It is a little bit harder to find subspecialty specific information. So specifically around neurotology, at least the sort of quick research that I did for you guys today is from the AAMC, the MGMA, and then there's some information also from the Academy. I think it's also important to do your diligence on the position that you're potentially looking at. Talk to the person who had left the position, if that's if it's a vacancy. And then I think it's also really important to talk to all of the parties involved. If you're being added in as a new partner, so growing the pie, right? So making sure that you're talking to all of the parties, and it's not just one person that you're talking with about the position. I think it's also, and you guys have great mentors at the House Clinic with a depth and incredible amount of experience. And so they know everybody and everybody knows your mentors. So utilize them as a resource to talk about the sort of the pros and cons of any specific position that you may be looking at. And this is also true for your residency mentors as well. I'm sure that they would be more than happy to talk to you about what your options are as you start to think about what's the next step for you. So when you think about, you sort of know your worth, right? So I pulled some of these data for you. This is from the AAMC Faculty Salary Survey from 2019. And although you can't read the top graph very well, I will tell you that this is specifically around otolaryngology. So it is not neurotology specific. But as you look at the chart at the bottom for the assistant professor level, which is probably where most of you would enter into the system. Certainly, the number of positions has increased over time. The salaries have also changed over time, but there is also a significant gap between what men and women are paid in our field. And although that has improved slightly from about $75,000 to $80,000 in 2013 in terms of the difference between what men and women were paid, that gap still existed in 2018, which is the last year that we have data for. So you can see that the median pay for a female faculty member at the at the assistant level was $319,000, and for men it was $380,000. So I personally find that really offensive, and I don't think it's reasonable. And I think that we need to make a dent in this gap because people should get equal pay for equal work. But so ladies out there, as you're listening to this, make sure that you are negotiating for what you are worth. Additionally, I think there's also some interesting variation in terms of what pay is out there based on region. So if you're taking a job, for instance, in the Northwest after fellowship, you're going to be paid a slightly lower level. This is median starting salaries for physicians, and this is academics, private practice, all comers. So comprehensive otolaryngologist, subspecialty trained people as well, as opposed to somebody who's taking a job, for instance, maybe in New England, where you're going to make about $25,000 more starting. But I think that's, it's good to have a frame of reference as you're starting out, and it's, not so that you're not asking for a number that's completely out of the realm of possibility for your region. I think that's important to have that information as well. Some of this is based on cost of living, although not all of it, because as you can see, the Mid-Atlantic doesn't pay as much as, say, the Southwest, where the cost of living in the Mid-Atlantic, which includes New York City, is significantly higher than it's going to be, say, in Yuma, Arizona. So I think that's also something to keep in mind. I pulled this is from MGMA. Let me just see this is all levels of pay. So this would be in academics, it would be an average number for all levels of academic rank. It's also information from hospital-based systems. So this is not necessarily the average starting or median starting salary, but this is a median salary for general or otolaryngology comprehensively. So you can see that there's quite a bit of wiggle room between where a base starting salary would be and where you would potentially end up in terms of your earning potential in that particular region. So I think having numbers and having data is important when you're starting to think about negotiating salary and those kinds of things. This is just data I pulled off the internet. It's out there, it's available. I think that there are also, if you have access into the AAMC website, you may be able to get more specific data from AAMC for academic based positions if you're interested in that. But this, again, as I said, is just stuff I pulled off the internet. So it's out there, and you can find it. Interestingly, this was a survey that was done by it's not a lobbying group, but it's sort of a physician advocacy group looking specifically around pay. And they also had some interesting information around salaries and what happened with that with COVID. But this was just some general information that they got from physicians, and this is all comers, so all specialty kinds of questionnaires that they sent out. So most physicians prefer to be paid via a merit-based incentive program, meaning that you have a base salary plus a production kind of bonus. You have to meet usually in those scenarios, you have to meet a certain level of work productivity to get your base salary, and then anything above that would be on a bonus structure. Half of physicians would like to be paid based on quality-based metrics such as patient satisfaction rather than just on sheer volume. And then a minority, or 30% of physicians, wanted to be paid a straight salary and then with a bonus so that they had an income guarantee. Interestingly, about a third of people wanted additional forms of compensation. So that may be anything from relocation fees to paying for CME, loan repayment. That's particularly more relevant for our primary care colleagues who can usually get some form of loan repayment or loan forgiveness from their employers. So those would be, those are not insignificant numbers. There are loan forgiveness of up to $100,000 for, especially since some of you have probably graduated with probably 3 times that amount of debt from medical school, is not an insignificant amount to get written off. So those are things I think that as we think about what are things that you can negotiate for, those are some things that you could think about negotiating for as you move forward. Some other things to think about, and this is a really long list, but it's not exhaustive. And I certainly would be very interested to hear what other people would suggest about things to think about when you are negotiating your next job. And a contract for employment may or most likely will not necessarily include this kind of language in it. You may get language around these kinds of things like clinic staff block time in something called a memorandum of understanding, which is not necessarily legally binding, but I think it's really important when you are talking about what is the program that you're willing to give you, to get it in writing. Because although we are negotiating in good faith verbally, that sometimes doesn't pan out. And so I think it's helpful to have it in writing so that you can go back, say in 3 years, if you were unhappy with this scenario that you found yourself in, and say, these are the things that we had talked about when I came to this position. Unfortunately, I'm not getting X, Y, or Z, that you have it in writing. And they can't say, well, we never promised you that, because they put it in writing for you. I think, everybody has a different list of priorities or things that are important to them as they're moving out into the world. I can tell you, when I finished my fellowship, I was 6 months pregnant and I had a toddler at home. And so it was important to me that I worked 4 days a week and that they were willing to negotiate around that so that I could spend a little bit of time at home with my very small children, because that was really important to me as a mom. But that may not be the thing for you, right? Like, you have to figure out what it is, the thing that is really important to you. I think for those of you who are interested in doing research, you have to be very thoughtful and deliberate around that. And what can you negotiate around your research? And I think probably, at least when I speak to my friends and colleagues who are do a lot of research, specifically clinician scientists, is that you really have to negotiate the time. You need to negotiate what kind of financial support the department is going to provide to you. What does that look like? How do you structure that financial support? Is it given to you as a lump sum? Is it sort of spread out over 3 years? Is it use it or lose it kind of money? And then space, especially if you're going to do bench research or have a wet lab, it is really important that you negotiate those kinds of things. The other things that I think are, you know, you can talk about, and these are, you know, especially if you're thinking about an academic position where maybe the salary isn't as negotiable, like this is the number that we're willing to give you, the things that you build around your position are negotiable, right? So block time. Do you have your own dedicated MA in the office? Do you have your own nurse? Do you have, you know, sort of talk to me about the audiology support that's going to happen for my clinics. Talk about OR equipment. Let's, you know, let me see the microscopes. Is, you know, if they have microscopes that are brand spanking new, shiny, you know, Panteros or Canevos or whatever it is, the new Leicas, that's great. But if not, then maybe that's something that's negotiable. Can they get you a new microscope? I think the other thing would be, you know, especially if you're interested in doing clinical research, what kind of support can they give you around clinical research? Do you have a research? Can you get a research assistant? Is there statistical support? Is there a research coordinator? Those kinds of things to help navigate some of the IRBs and those kinds of things. So, once you've, you know, that list is certainly not exhaustive, but I do think it's important to make a list, right? So think about the things to you that are not negotiable. Like, I'm not gonna do X, Y, or Z, or I'm not gonna, you know, see general or comprehensive ENT patients, right? I mean, that's something that I fortunately have not had to do when I've negotiated jobs. I didn't have to say, you know, I'm not going to see, you know, Globus or chronic cough, or what are some of the other things that we sometimes see. But I think there are things that are clearly negotiable, right? So, and then I think there are things that, you know, maybe that's not as important to you. And so if they say, you know, you can have a lab space, but it's 3 blocks away, okay, fine. You know, if that's not, if location for your lab is not necessarily important to you, great, no problem. Again, I think it's important to rank order this list. So what's really critical to you? What's important to you? What could you say, you know, whatever, or you couldn't really care less about in terms of what you're negotiating for. So I'm going to give you guys, and I don't, we're not going to like go into breakout rooms or anything like this, but I think I'd like for you to take maybe just 2 or 3 minutes and write down a couple of the things that are things that would be really critical to you as you're thinking about this, your next position, or what it is that you're going to do next. So I'll give you, this is what your pen and paper were for. Okay, so make a list. I'll give you 3 minutes. And feel free, I'm going to just stop sharing again. Happy to chat about things, especially for the faculty and like Dr. Volker, who've been out and had to do negotiations. What were some of the things that were important to you when you were out doing that? Dr. Payne, you can also chime in too.
I think I had to say it, but I feel like salary is first and foremost the most important.
Yeah, and I think that's legitimate, right? Like it is for most people, and when you're negotiating a job, the most important thing that you're going to be thinking about, right? Yeah. Don't disagree with that.
And I think more and more, since a lot of us are working for bigger organizations, benefits are less negotiable than they used to be. So that takes that off the table, but benefits are definitely very important.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're like, for instance, in my organization, yeah, you're right. Like, this is your package. This is what you get. You can get a 403B and you get a 457, and this is your health plan. You can pick from these 3 terrible options. But you're right. But I think some of those other things that I had on this slide beforehand around block time, around support, those things which are it's many times departmentally internal, those I think are the more negotiable things. And those things in some respects are quality of life. I mean, like they help you, right? Like, can you get a scribe? By the way, ask for a scribe. Best thing ever. It makes your life so much easier. But so some of those internal things that are internal to the department are things that you're going to have a whole lot more negotiating power around. Yeah.
Totally agree.
And Dr. Slattery or Dr. House or Dr. Brackman, you guys have been certainly on the other side of negotiation, right? As you're negotiating with new partners, what are some of the things that you think about as sort of the position, this, I guess you guys would be the sellers, right?
Well, Sarah, when I came to the House group, that was in 1970, and I was offered $33,000, and I jumped at it because that was actually that was a little bit of a cut in salary because I was moonlighting and had $500 or $600 a month salary from LA County. But anyway, I was so pleased and happy to be invited to be in the group that there was no negotiation, no contract. It was a handshake and welcome, and I was jumped on it. So anyway, times have changed.
I think that's my experience too. There was no negotiation on my part, and it was just a matter of, this is what we're going to do for you. And the first year you'll get this salary, the second year you get that, third you'll be on a percentage, and after that you're a full partner, and take it or leave it. And it was a handshake. No, 15-page contracts from attorneys and negotiations, and so it was very easy. Certainly, I'm sorry that it is that way today, because we had an opportunity to join, and we did. We were just thrilled to be there.
Yeah. Well, you brought up attorneys, and that is something that I think in the current employment climate that we're in, right? I do think it's especially important. Most contracts that you're going to get especially from larger employers, whether that's a hospital-based system or a university system, or even a multi-specialty group, are going to be relatively standard. However, I do think that there are some nuances that they can put into contracts, and I do think it's a good idea to just have a contract lawyer look at your contract for you and say, because sometimes the wording, you may end up having to do something that you weren't necessarily expecting, the way that the contract is written, because it's written in legalese, and that is sort of foreign to us. Like, we can write a note that most people can't read also, but for different reasons. So the lawyers are also pretty good at reading things that are hard necessarily to interpret for those who don't do that every day. So I think that's pretty much all I had for, I don't have anything else really. I hope I'd be happy to answer questions. Again, I am not a negotiation expert, but I think that if you think about these things as you're moving forward. You'll go a long way towards making yourself happier in your first positions out of training, if you're not afraid to ask.
Hey, Sarah, let me ask you this as with an academic position, how do you handle call with the system?
I think that's really group specific. So like for instance, our group, I do have to take general call, and I always end up doing some airway or neck pus. It's just like I have the black cloud that's persisted into academic, into my real life, as even when I was a resident, I was that way. But I know other partners or people who, like for instance, Andy McCall is over at Pittsburgh, and he and I were talking about their call structure, and they take otology specific call, and they take like a week at a time or something like that. So they really only do something if an ear related problem comes in. So they don't take airway call, they don't take peds call. So I think it's very group specific. And that is probably not super negotiable, depending, especially going into a larger academic group.
So have you worked any kind of relationship with your other colleagues to cover each other? Were they helping you help, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good question. So, a lot of the time, if there is some ear-related emergency, for a while it was just me and Maroon Saban, and they would just call one of us, whoever picked up the phone first, right? And then now that there's 4 of us, usually we get a group text from the residents or from the attending who's on call covering that night, and to just say, this is what's come in, who can handle it today, because there's almost always somebody on at our main campus facility, but that's a relatively informal relationship. We do have a peds airway call pool, so our peds friends have a sort of backup pediatric airway call structure that they have put together, that the residents know that if a peds airway comes in, they just call that person. Thank goodness, because I hate peds airway. It's the worst. So, but yes, I would say there's some of these are formalized and some of them are informalized.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah.
This was very good. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. What other questions do people have about this process? I mean, again, I would just encourage you to ask, and I think to know what's important to you as you go into this process. And I'll tell you, the first job I went to, the chair that I was negotiating with said, okay, well, give me a list of the things that you want. So I sent him the list, and then he was like, yeah, I can't do a lot of that. I was like, but, and I didn't know enough to say, wait a minute, let's negotiate about that. I just was like, oh, okay. But yeah, so.
Hello, my name is Dr. Kevin Peng, neurotologist here at the House Institute. Thank you for watching this video. The House Institute provides free educational videos for hearing health professionals worldwide. To help support videos like these and other educational efforts, please consider donating by clicking the link in the description box below. Your generous support allows us to keep videos like these at no cost for you and others. Thank you.